The neon sign of the Rusty Spoon Diner flickered rhythmically, casting a pale blue glow over the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, maple syrup, and the comforting grease of a flat-top grill. It was a Tuesday evening, the quietest time for the small-town establishment, but for Martha Evans, it was the highlight of her week. Martha, 72 years young, sat in her usual corner booth. She wore a floral Sunday dress and a hand-knit cardigan, her silver hair neatly pinned back. Martha had spent 40 years teaching elementary school in this town, and her face was a map of kind smiles and gentle patience. Across from her sat her son Elias. He was a man of few words, built like a mountain of solid granite. He wore a plain black t-shirt that stretched tight across his shoulders, his posture unnervingly still. To the casual observer, he looked like a fit man in his late 30s. To the trained eye, he looked like a coiled spring. Elias was home on a rare 2-week leave, a secret he kept close to his chest. In the world of the Navy SEALs, your business stayed your business. "Eat your pie, Elias," Martha said, pushing a plate of cherry cobbler toward him. "You've lost weight, they aren't feeding you enough wherever it is you go." Elias smiled, a rare, soft expression that only his mother could coax out. "I eat plenty, Ma, it's just high protein, not much room for cobbler in the field." "Well, you're not in the field now, you're in Oakhaven, here we eat cobbler." The bell above the door jingled sharply. The peaceful atmosphere of the diner shifted instantly. 3 men walked in, their boots heavy on the linoleum floor. The leader was a man named Travis, a local troublemaker known more for his loud mouth and hateful ideologies than for any honest work. He was tall, bloated by beer, and wore a cap emblazoned with symbols that favored exclusion over community. Travis and his friends slid into the booth directly behind Martha, despite the diner being nearly empty. Travis intentionally bumped Martha's shoulder as he passed, nearly knocking her water glass over. "Watch it, old lady," Travis muttered, his voice thick with a sneer. Elias' eyes flickered, the pupils constricting. He didn't move, but his hand stopped halfway to his fork. "Ma," he said quietly, "you okay?" "I'm fine, baby," Martha whispered, reaching across to pat his hand. "Just ignore them." But Travis wasn't looking to be ignored. He was looking for a stage. He began talking loudly to his friends, his voice dripping with venomous remarks about people who don't belong in this town and the good old days when everyone knew their place. The insults were thinly veiled, aimed directly at the only 2 black patrons in the room. The waitress, a young girl named Sarah, nervously approached their table. "Can I get you guys started with some coffee?" Travis looked at Sarah, then gestured toward Martha. "Why are you serving them first? We're the ones who actually pay taxes in this county. Why don't you clear out the trash before you take our order?" Sarah turned pale. "Sir, please, I just work here." Martha tried to maintain her dignity. She took a slow sip of her tea, her hands shaking just a fraction. Elias remained a statue. He was calculating. He wasn't afraid, fear had been trained out of him a decade ago, but he was in his hometown with his mother. He wanted a peaceful meal. "Elias," Martha whispered, "let's just go." "We haven't finished the cobbler, Ma," Elias said, his voice a low, vibrating hum. Travis overheard. He stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. He walked around to the side of Martha's booth. He was a foot taller than her, looming like a dark cloud. "I think your son didn't hear me," Travis said, leaning down so his face was inches from Martha's. "I said the trash needs to be taken out." Martha looked up at him, her eyes filled with more pity than fear. "Young man, I taught 3 of your cousins in 3rd grade. I know your family. Your grandmother would be ashamed to hear you speak this way." The mention of his family, especially from a woman he deemed inferior, flipped a switch in Travis's volatile mind. His face turned a deep, ugly red. "Don't you talk about my family," he hissed. Before Elias could even breathe, Travis's hand lashed out. It was a sharp, stinging slap that landed squarely on Martha's cheek. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Martha's head snapped to the side, her glasses sliding off her nose and clattering onto the table. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. The 2 men with Travis stood up, grinning, expecting a scuffle they could win by sheer numbers. Then Elias stood up. He didn't jump, he didn't shout. He rose with a predatory grace that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He stood a full head shorter than Travis, but he seemed to fill the entire diner. The temperature felt like it dropped 20 degrees. Travis laughed, though it sounded a bit forced. "What, you want some too, boy?" Elias didn't answer. He reached down, picked up his mother's glasses and placed them gently in her hand. "Close your eyes, Ma," he said softly. "Elias, don't," she started, her voice trembling. "Eyes closed, Ma." Travis lunged, a slow, telegraphed haymaker intended to end the fight quickly. To Elias, the movement looked like it was happening underwater. He didn't even use his fists. Elias stepped inside the arc of the punch, his hand moving like a blurred shadow. He caught Travis's wrist with his left hand and applied a pressure point squeeze that sent the larger man screaming to his knees. With his right hand, Elias grabbed Travis by the throat, not to choke him but to control him. Travis's friends moved to intervene. Elias didn't even look at them. He snapped a sidekick into the lead friend's kneecap, a clinical strike that sent the man crashing into a nearby table. The third man stopped dead in his tracks, his bravado evaporating as he looked into Elias' eyes. He didn't see a man, he saw a predator. He saw the cold, calculated stare of a man who had hunted monsters in the dark corners of the world so that people back home could sleep in peace. Elias turned his attention back to Travis, who was now gasping, his face turning from red to purple. Elias leaned in close, his voice a terrifyingly calm whisper that carried to every corner of the diner. "That woman," Elias said, nodding toward Martha, "is a saint. She spent 40 years making sure kids like you didn't grow up to be failures, and you just laid a hand on her." I didn't," Travis wheezed. Elias increased the pressure on the wrist. A sickening pop echoed. "I am Chief Petty Officer Elias Evans. I have operated in environments you couldn't imagine in your worst nightmares. I have faced men who make you look like a frightened child. Do you know what we do to threats, Travis?" Yeah. Travis shook his head frantically, tears of pain streaming down his face. "We neutralize them," Elias said. He didn't break Travis's neck, though he could have. Instead, he simply stood Travis up by his collar and walked him toward the glass front door. Travis tried to struggle, but Elias' grip was like a steel vise. With one fluid motion, Elias opened the door and hurled the man out into the parking lot. Travis landed hard on the gravel, rolling until he hit a dumpster. Elias turned back to the two friends. One was clutching his knee on the floor, the other was shaking. "Pick him up," Elias commanded. "And if I ever see any of you within 5 miles of my mother again, I won't be using my hands. I'll be using my training. Do you understand?" They scrambled out of the diner, dragging their injured leader toward their truck. The tires screeched as they sped away into the night. Elias took a deep breath, his shoulders dropping an inch as he consciously de-escalated his nervous system. He turned back to the booth. Sarah, the waitress, was standing there with a wet cloth and a fresh glass of water. "Is she okay?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Elias slid back into the booth. Martha was sitting upright, her glasses back on. There was a red mark on her cheek, but her gaze was steady. "I'm all right, Sarah," Martha said, taking the cloth. "Thank you." She looked at her son. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She saw the killer in him, the part of him the government had built, and she saw the little boy who used to bring her dandelions from the garden. "You went a bit heavy on the neutralizing, Elias," she said, her voice regaining its teacher-like sternness. Elias looked down at his hands. "He touched you, Ma, there's a line, he crossed it." "I know," she sighed, reaching out to touch his scarred knuckles. "But you've got to be careful, you're a leader of men, you can't let hate pull you down to its level." "It wasn't hate," Elias corrected, "it was justice, there's a difference." The diner owner, an old veteran named Hank, walked out from the kitchen. He had a shotgun in his hand, but seeing the empty room, he set it on the counter. He looked at the broken chair and the displaced tables, then at Elias. "I saw the whole thing on the monitor, Elias," Hank said, nodding with respect. "Dinner's on the house. In fact, dinner's on the house for the rest of the week. That trash has been bothering people for months. No one had the guts to stand up to them." "He didn't just stand up," Martha said, a hint of pride finally breaking through her shock. "He stood for something." They sat in the diner for another hour. Elias helped Hank straighten the tables and sweep up the glass from a broken salt shaker. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the quiet, heavy bond between a mother and her son. As they walked out to Elias' truck, the cool night air felt different. The town felt a little lighter, a little cleaner. As Elias opened the door for his mother, he noticed a small group of locals standing near the grocery store across the street. They had seen the truck speed away. They had seen the man who walked out of the diner. News travels fast in a small town. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Martha Evans's son wasn't just a quiet guy who moved away to the city. They would know he was a protector, a shield. Elias started the engine. "You want to go home, Ma?" Martha looked at the red mark in the rearview mirror, then at her son's profile, strong, determined, and fiercely loyal. She smiled. "I want to go home and have another piece of cobbler. I think I have some in the fridge." Elias chuckled and put the truck in gear. He had traveled all over the world, fought in shadows, and survived the impossible. But as he drove down the familiar streets of Oakhaven, he realized that no mission was more important than the one he had just completed. The bully had learned a lesson that no textbook could teach, that behind every gentle soul is a history, and behind every mother is a son who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. The Navy SEAL wasn't just a title or a career, it was the man he had become so that women like Martha could live in a world where they never had to be afraid. As the lights of the Rusty Spoon faded in the distance, the town of Oakhaven slept a little sounder, knowing that the mountain of a man was watching over his mother, and by extension, all of them.